In the last section, we spoke about our solution to the queue from stack problem. In this section, we're now going to start to implement that solution. So inside of my index.js file in the queue from S directory, I'm going to scroll on down to the class queue. So this thing right here is where we want to add our functionality. All right, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here. Now the first thing to recognize, and this was something that I didn't really write out in the directions, so this was something for you to kind of figure out on your own. The first thing to recognize was that we needed to create two stacks whenever we create an instance of this class queue right here. So inside of our constructor method, check your spelling because I just made a mistake myself. So constructor right here, we're going to create two stacks and assign them to this instance of the queue. So we'll say this dot first to represent our first stack will be a new stack. And then this dot second will be new stack as well. So this right here might have been a little bit unclear. I kind of, tested the waters here. Hopefully you found some success understanding that you had to do this as step one. So now whenever we create an instance of a queue, we will automatically generate two stacks and assign it to this queue class. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is implement our add method. As we saw just a moment ago, looking at our diagram, the add method is really straightforward. All we're going to do is take the record we're trying to add and we're going to push it into stack A. So I'm going to define my add method. It's going to accept a record. Now this doesn't have to be called record. You can call it record, data, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it record. We're going to take that record right there and we're going to push it into our first stack. So we'll call this .first.push and we'll pass in our record like so. All right, so now if we created an instance of a queue and called add on it multiple times, like let's imagine with multiple colors here, we could add into it green, blue, and red. So now after adding those three records, if we called remove on our queue structure, my expectation would be that I would get back the record green right here. So let's now implement our remove method. So this is where the bulk of logic is going to come into play. So here is remove. So we want to make sure that we iterate through all of the records inside of stack A. For every record in stack A, we want to pop it out and push it into stack B. The next thing to recognize here is that whenever we say iterate through, we really only can tell whether or not there are any remaining records inside of stack A through the use of the peek method. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the peek method. And so long as it returns a record, we will continue to iterate and continue to push records from A over to B. Now, I don't know about you, but the first thing that comes to mind when I describe what we're trying to do there is a while loop. So we're going to set up a while loop and we're going to continue running that while loop so long as this .first.peek, which represents stack A right here, returns a truthy value or returns basically a value. So inside of our remove method, we'll say while this .first.peek, as long as this keeps returning a value right here, as long as there's still something for us to operate on, we will pop out a record. So we'll say const record is this .first.pop, and then we will push it into our second stack. So this .second.push, and we'll add our record into it. Now, when you look at these two lines of code right here, I wrote it this way just to make sure that what we're doing here is very clear. But of course, this can be easily combined down into one line. So rather than using this temporary variable of record, I'm not going to say that I want to push in this .first.pop. So just take whatever we are popping out of there and immediately push it into the second stack. And then we don't need this extra line of code right here anymore. So this will iterate through all the records inside of our first stack. As long as there is something to pop out of there, we will continue to pop out and push every record in order into the second stack. Now, just to make sure it's really clear, when this loop right here comes to conclusion, when it's all done, that means everything has been moved over. So every record has now been moved over to stack B. So like we said before, to now somehow get access to or somehow return the record that we really care about here, we have to pop out of stack B, and that will give us record green. So right underneath here, I'm going to say const record. This is the record that we actually want to return right here, will be this.second.pop. Now remember, take note here that we are not immediately returning. So we're not saying return this.second.pop because we don't want to return yet. We do want to save a reference to this record, right? We definitely want to save a record to, or save a reference to it. But before we return, we want to make sure that we restore the state of our stacks here. So we want to first make sure we pop everything from stack B back over to stack A. And that gets us ready for the next call to the remove method. So immediately underneath that assignment, we will do the exact same loop that we did right here. But this time around, we're going to be looking at the records inside of the second stack. And for every record in there, we're going to pop it over to the first stack. So we'll say while this.second, notice second right here, dot peak. So long as there is a record there, I want to push that into the first stack. And I want to take that from this.second.pop. So take every record out of the second stack, all right, not every record right here, just to be clear, just one record at a time, pop it out, and then add it to our first stack. So this will return us back to the original state. It'll put everything back into stack A. Once that's all done, now we are ready to return a record. So that now we want to return the record variable right here. So we will return record, like so. Okay, so here's our remove method. That's it for the implementation. Let's check out our tests really quickly. Well, it looks like we still have some passing tests, but it looks like our peak method is still failing the test because we have not yet implemented it. So just to be clear, yeah, peak is a separate method. We've only added add and remove. Now the peak method itself is going to be nearly identical to what we just did here for remove. Remember, we just discussed that in the last section looking at the diagram for peak. So we're going to put everything over to B again, but this time, once everything has been moved over to B, we're going to peak at B. That will give us a reference to this record right here, and we will return that reference. So we're not going to pop this time from B, we're just going to peak B. After we peak at B, we will then again restore everything back over to stack A, like so. All right, let's give this a shot. So we'll define our peak method. We'll say while there are still records in the first stack, we need to take that record, so this.first.pop, and I want to put that into this.second.push. So we've got this.second.push, and then inside of a set of parentheses, we are calling that thing with this.first.pop. Then immediately beneath it, this is where we're going to get a reference to the top record inside of second. So to get a reference to it, we're just going to call peak. Remember, we're not going to pop this time. So we'll say const record equals this.second.peak right here. So this gives us a reference to that green record. And then finally, we'll take everything out of that second stack and move it all back over to the first stack again. So while this.second.peak, by the way, make sure that you've got parentheses after both the peak calls right here. You don't want to just be calling this.second.peak without the parens. Make sure you got the parens there. So while we still have records inside of the second stack, we will take every record out of there one at a time and push it into first. So this.first.push, this.second.pop. And then finally, at the very bottom, we will return the reference to the second record. So return record, like so. All right, let's check our test now, and it looks like everything is passing. All right, so not that bad. The big challenge here, like I said, is all about just seeing the problem one time. I think that as long as you kind of understand that first part of, okay, we're going to put everything into stack A, and then whenever we want to remove a record, we need to pop it all into stack B, and then pop the top of stack B one time. That's challenge number one. Then challenge number two is figuring out how to iterate or kind of process through all the records in a stack. And that's done by using a while loop along with the peak method right here. So hopefully this wasn't too bad. Again, this is probably one of the most common interview questions you're going to see with stacks and queues. And like I said before, yeah, no practical application, but that's the life of interview questions. So hopefully this was an enjoyable experience. Let's now continue in the next section. We're going to start to move on to our next big data structure. And this one's going to be a pretty big doozy, so let's move on and get started right away.